Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Flamin' Hot Ask Mom and Dad. Why do I say it's flamin' hot? Because
It's hot outside?
yeah, you're on top of things. You're right here with me on top of things.
That's
I'm
funny.
here
We're
with
actually doing okay because we're inside.
yeah, but if you hear any rumble in the background, it's because I am not turning no air conditioners off today for nothing because I'm not comfortable. And it isn't because I am not comfortable because I am overly heated. I'm just not. That didn't come out quite well.
Maybe a little bit of humidity, a little bit of direct sunshine, a little bit of that it actually is finally summer. Is that what you're saying?
It could be that. It could be that it's fine. It's finale. Fine. Yes. I want to stop trying to elaborate on the weather right now and see if I can put together any conjoining words in order to sentence myself today. Speaking of sentences, let's try and construct one. I'm so glad that you guys chose to listen today. We are enjoying our continued. I'm going to stop talking. Tanya, what's on your mind today? How are you doing? Because I am sure having a rough time just having a conversation starting out today.
I don't know. It's kind of weird these days. It seems like lots of conversations spurred on what's in the news, and so it's a little bit hard to get all excited about just about anything these days. Although we're in an exciting, maybe possibility of a small town and people excited about what God might be doing in their little church and stuff. So that's at least something hopeful.
That is interesting. You know, speaking of small town and hopeful churches, since we've moved to Tennessee, I mean, all five of you know that. Hey, I'm up from one listener to say we at least have five.
Okay, good.
The difference in the way culture and Christianity interact here versus the way culture and Christianity interact in the Northwest is kind of an interesting thing. What do you think?
Well, what angle are you getting at?
Well, okay. So last night there was a pagan festival that was happening now we're in Tennessee and we're in the country in Tennessee. So we're outside, not that far out of Nashville, about 40 hours. That's how far we used to be from Nashville. Now we're about 40 minutes from Nashville. And so as we are here, there was some churches gathered together to kind of not counter protest, but counter prayer test. That's counter prayer testing. I like that. That's a good term.
They said even counter the
worship
what they
vibe.
call it, the vibe,
Yeah.
which is kind of a Northwest or West term. That's funny to me.
Right. And I think it's kind of interesting, for no reason other than when I opened it up and looked at the website and all that kind of stuff, I'm thinking, oh, this is just all the people that we know from California and Oregon and Phoenix. It's that lefty, Christless world. It's a world with, it's people who don't follow Jesus.
Because what we were thinking was the thing that was interesting about this one, because if that was a gathering in the Northwest, it would just be any day at the park, Heritage Park there in Olympia, any of our festivals that were literally just a lake
with the
fair.
dancing feather.
It would be all that, yeah.
Maybe lady,
really,
maybe
that
guy
was
person.
Legitimately just concerts in the park, and we would see these
family
weird
concerts in the parks.
things happen. But here, what was interesting was they actually called it a pagan something, right? Did you ever find out the actual
I
name
had
of
to.
it?
Let me see what I've got on my phone.
So I thought
probably
that was
still look on my phone.
interesting, just in the sense that being in this area, first of all, feels like
Pagan Unity Festival.
So again, absolutely an interesting title, because you know immediately that they're trying to draw in the counterculture of this region, as well as almost as if to cause offense directly. Because if you just have say you called it a color festival, or even if you named it by some Eastern religion names or something that nobody recognized, it wouldn't be quite as obvious. So it's interesting to me they chose that name, Pagan Unity or whatever.
But yeah, listen to this. Listen to the description of the Pagan Unity Festival, because I'm one of the things that pops out here is Pagan Unity Festival is a 26-year-old family-oriented 4-day event in the rolling hills of Middle Tennessee. We offer dozens of workshops, pagan authors, music, food, rituals, drumming, shopping, children's activities, and fun. We are in person, also virtually. Join us for some good old Southern pagan hospitality, which frankly was pretty similar to the Renaissance fair we went to
That's
last
what
week.
I'm trying to say.
And
It's funny how something is labeled something. I legitimately think almost intentionally to try to either separate themselves
I
out.
don't disagree. Yeah, they're trying to separate
Or
themselves
to
out. Sure.
cause a rebellion or to cause a, well, if you don't feel, this is what my thoughts are, if you don't feel accepted by the Christian bunch over here, then why don't you gather over here with us pagans? And, but what's funny about that, like you just said, is that's the world. It's just literally the world without God is pagan. So interesting that they want to use that term. I would legitimately like to interview someone and find out why they chose that
Yeah, I think
term.
you know,
Unless they're literally worshiping a false god, which doesn't necessarily going to be listed on there, I guess. Isn't that what we
the idea
would
of
associate
pagan is
with
kind
pagan?
of harmony with the earth and witches and stuff. It's more of a nature. I mean, they are worshiping the earth kind of thing, and it has lots of forms. But most of the time, you find like Wicca and these kinds of expressions in it, which is not a specific deity but a pantheistic expression. That's my understanding of
So
of
more
it.
Hindu in the
Well,
god of the earth or the god of
Hindu's
the sun or the
very
god of that kind of
specific
thing,
and
or-
cultural, I think. Pagan, let me see, pagan definition, festival, American pagan definition. We got to go to what it is, right? American
probably
pagan,
is.
I should ask Siri. American pagan defined. DEFINED. Hey, why not? Contemporary form of paganism such as Wicca or new paganism. So that's
Okay,
that's
that
the
doesn't
Debs-
give us any
that's the
actual-
Debster, the Merriam-Webster definition
What's
of
the
it.
definition of actual? I guess I've always thought
Well,
it
paganism-
was against God, but you're saying it's not necessarily.
Pagan is not not Christian, or is not Judeo-Christian. It's just pagan. It's just culturally something else. Well,
This says, especially in historical context, a person holding religious beliefs other than those of main or recognized religions.
right, and here you have the
An
second.
adjective,
the second.
holding or constituting religious beliefs other than those of main religions or recognized, and relating to adhering a modern religious movement that seeks to incorporate beliefs or practices from outside the main world religions, especially nature worship, neo-pagan.
Right, so you've got
Okay,
the spiritual
well,
beliefs and
that's
practices.
not quite as offensive. We think of pagan, though, we think of like directly against God, don't we? When
Well,
we're
it
talking
is
about,
directly against God in the sense that anything that is not directly for God is against him, in the sense that, God accuses Israel of unfaithfulness because they begin to incorporate any kind of cultural way that is the people of the land, the pagan. It's ancient polytheism is what paganism is. That's ancient definition of it. But if you bring it forward, it's just an American. The reason I said American paganism is
which
because
didn't give us really
No,
other
because
than like
it's-
naturalism. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, it's natural. Anything that's not mainline. That's what your definition said, and that's
Yeah.
right. It's just it is a reaction to Christianity and people who have a in American culture particularly, because American culture is Christian influenced, and so they're pagans. Especially, what's funny about modern pagans is the beliefs and practices of modern pagans morally. Are highly influenced by Christian beliefs
Yeah,
and
I was gonna
practices.
say,
Because if
they
they were
line up
ancient
closer.
pagans, they'd be sacrificing children in the park.
That's what I was trying to get at, because ancient practices were more about pleasing whatever gods were out there, even if they didn't have a particular god, right? Or
Yeah.
a particular. Anyway,
So
this
that
says
oftentimes-
pagans believe that nature is sacred, and the natural cycles of birth, growth, and death observed in the world around us carry profoundly spiritual meanings. Human beings are seen as part of nature, along with other animals, trees, stones, plants, and everything else that is of this earth. Yeah, that's funny because we've talked about medicine at different times and how it used to be that people who studied like medicinal herbs and stuff were kind of seen as witches, or they were acquainted with witchcraft. Is this kind of the same idea, paganistic understandings? But to me, here I am, a Christian, I love that angle on medicine because I feel like God created it. God gave me
There's
that
nothing-
medicinal herb.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to relate it back to him, not just separate it out as natural. But this is very much, I guess,
Well,
what
it's-
Romans 1 is addressing, right?
That's what
they
Paul
gave
says when he
to the
says they worship the
natural-
creator, the created things rather than the creator.
Sure,
So
yeah.
basically, anytime you attribute something to anything created, when you attribute it to his being in and of itself, of entity, of its own self-sustaining, the ability to exist on its own, then you make it a deity. You turn it into a god, the god of dirt for that matter. You could just whatever it is, because the soil is what brings the nutrient
Yeah.
to the plant.
Well,
so
the whole
god,
Mother Earth kind of idea.
Exact-
where the
exactly.
Earth is the source of it, rather than God Himself.
right, rather
Giving
than
it
something
accolades to God.
existent, which is what God is self-existent. And so the
So
idea
that's
there is
interesting because, like you were saying last night, we talked a little bit about while we prayed for our friends who were praying, and we prayed kind of against the situation at the same time as for those who need to know Jesus and might get a chance to hear the gospel, because it's not quite as offensive to me to think of it that way as it would be if I was walking into. We heard about when we were in Olympia, there was a meeting of. It was a particular god, Dionysius or something. Remember
Dionysus.
that? Meeting at the Governor
Oh
Hotel.
yeah, I kind of remember that.
And that should have been much more offensive in that way. Although I would say these people would say maybe there's no need of God. Would they tend to be atheist in that sense? Like
They would
we
be
don't-
all over the map. I honestly think that the geeky culture of games and our fascination. I mean, when I was in 8th grade, I was fascinated with Greek mythology. There's nothing wrong with being interested in what history holds. But I think the fascination kind of breeds into, people role-playing and gameplays and all those kinds of things. And then they begin to, if they don't have a rooted faith foundation that they know they can differentiate faith, fantasy and reality,
yeah.
they begin to say, or there's two things I think. Some actually believe in the fantasy, which is kind of odd to me, because if you really want to talk about where science argues and defeats religion, it's in the realms of these pantheistic things, because we understand these things. When we put science against Christianity, we find more often than not it more underlines that there's
Yeah,
something
it
larger.
agrees or comes
You're
together.
never going to catch up with the created order. With science, we will always be digging a little deeper, looking a little further. We didn't, some 30 years ago, we thought the atom was the smallest particle, and since then we've gone much smaller than the atom in what we've been able to discover. So it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and bigger and bigger and bigger. And now we make movies about the things that are so small they break into different realities. I mean, we have our fantasies go crazy with what things could be. So, if that made any sense to you, yeah. So when people are just kind of dancing around Mother Earth and creating all of these spells and potions, I think a lot of it is just fantasy, and people have to suspend disbelief in
Yeah, so
order
they
to
don't-
just kind of.
So they don't actually
Be-
have to deal with it.
It's
I mean,
taking
literally,
cosplay
like,
to
they
a
don't-
whole new level.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking, so that they literally don't have to understand or search out and understand eternity. These people tend to believe probably in reincarnation, where they can come back as an animal or a this or a that, because that way they don't have to relate it to actual life, right? To living right now. Is that what?
I honestly, I think it's a way to engage things without taking seriously, truthfully.
Eternal values. That's what I was
Eternal
saying,
values.
or
Yeah, if you
eternity.
engage with Christianity, if you engage with God and Jesus directly, you have to realize that He's going to engage back. And I think that it's a lot easier for us to create, and this again is in the scripture, to create gods in our own image that allow us to be whatever we feel or want to be, rather than it is for us to put ourselves in a position where we're going to be constantly corrected and rebuked. And one of the things that I've often said about Christianity is what is beautiful about Christianity is it's self-reflective, in that we have to look at ourselves with an integrity that says, how do we line up with an unmovable truth? And that causes us to evaluate ourselves against that truth and say, I'm wrong. And we live in a world that does not like to say, I'm wrong.
Want to be wrong or
Right.
admit any wrong. Yes.
So what they do in the Pagan Unity Festival, number one, unity in and of itself is not a pagan characteristic. It's a Christian characteristic. It's in Ephesians. It's in Galatians. It's in, going through the, there's no interest of pagans uniting. They were bitter, competitive gods. They were petty. And so when you look at these things, this whole idea of harmony and unity, some of it they say comes from the Indian cultures. And so there may be smidgens of writings here and there, but the overall arching aspect of these things were these demanding, petty creations, gods that didn't really have any interest of heart of us in mind at all. So if there was a drought, they would associate that to fertility and to and therefore they would create these rituals to try and egg on the rain. And it could be anything from sexual to child sacrifice, go all the way down the rain.
So
These are crazy
very
stuff.
base nature, whatever we can feel and touch and smell and taste, right? That
The idea
without. So why do they call it spiritual when it really is more about base nature?
in
what's around
in my understanding of ancient paganism, there was never such a thing as where people would want to be in harmony with or in unity with the deities. The deities were to be avoided, and they were afraid of those deities. They would appease. There was an appeasing process with deities. The idea
Yeah.
of being one with earth and things like that, that's a uniquely modern thing. And like I said, I think it's rooted in Christianity, and in the sense that we have culture generation after generation of people raised in a culture, American culture, that is Christian in nature, that was rooted with Christian moral principles, and that has been passed on. And instead of giving God credit for that, little by little, every generation gave God less and less credit for these things and took ownership of them themselves, and then began to create gods, giving some of those characteristics to those gods. And God does not like you taking His personality and giving it a different name. And so,
Well, and it makes me think of, because unity itself doesn't sound like a bad thing, but we know in Genesis, was it chapter 9 or whatever, where the Tower of Babel, that was a bad thing in the sense that they unified, but not toward God, not about God, not letting Him be the unifier. And in that, it was offensive to God because they wanted to be God, reach the heavens, say they were, I guess, in my understanding of that.
You're right. They wanted that we
specific
can be
thing.
like
So
God. It's the
God
same thing that happened in the
divided
Garden of
them.
Eden with Adam and Eve. That they
Yeah,
believed
because-
they could be like God. That was the deception of the enemy.
So in this, is that maybe what they think they're doing, is this
Oh, absolutely.
unity of
We can.
oneness with the earth and oneness with each other kind of thing. It's almost like, makes me think of Star Trek, the Borg, too, how you will be assimilated. Because if you don't have your own thoughts or feelings or things, then you're acceptable no matter what you are or do, and you're one with nature, which means you can be one with the animals, and you are basically just an animal, right? There's no, all of that is, man, what a tangled web.
It doesn't
we
make
weave,
any
huh?
sense to me, because the desire to be united with something that's true. God, we can pretend like all we want to that that lizards are just as good as we are, to use your illustration. But the reality is no, because I can easily capture and destroy a lizard if I want to. That gives me authority over it, which makes me
And
not
isn't it
better
interesting-
morally, but
Yeah,
I have
isn't it
authority.
interesting
I
that
have
they want
power
to-
over it.
that they want to be one, but God gave them power over the land and the earth and to rule it. So it's funny how they want to rule on one side, it seems like, be in power, be in charge of their own lives or whatever. On the other side, they want to be one with nature and just like a lizard, like you said. So whereas God has given them identity in Himself and then also caused them to be able to be more special in that sense, closer to understanding Him and in power over the earth and over it's makes no sense. I'm going to read a little bit of that passage because I think it's just fascinating. For His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they're without excuse, for although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, like you just said. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, animals, and creeping things. And because of that, God gives them up to the lusts of their hearts and to impurity, to worshiping and serving a creature rather than a creator. It's just so sad because God has revealed himself to us, the Bible says, so that we would know all these fascinating things that he's created and
Right.
the power
And
that
it's important what he says there about, not giving thanks. Not giving thanks, I think, is understanding that gratitude to God, is what reminds us that we are not the originator of things.
Yeah.
You don't thank
Not the
you don't
end all.
thank yourself for things. You thank the one who gave you the gift. And so I think that when you are faithful to take your attitude, your GER attitude, take your attitude even when you're having a bad day, and you just kind of show God gratitude. You're going to find yourself thinking about life differently by the time you're done with that, because you're
And
going to
it's-
realize that you have a sense of
Yeah,
well-being that you
it's
didn't otherwise realize
exactly,
you had.
so much more hopeful. I don't understand why they would want to hope in the earth that they say we're, quote, destroying, or they're seeing it. I mean, they may not, I don't know what they think about that. And
Well, I could take a really
And how
condescending point of view and say they're not. They're just being children and they want their way, and so they're going to do whatever they want. No, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. I'm going to go over here and pretend that this imaginary being. I mean, we all had imaginary beings and imaginary friends when we were children, but now we have adults having imaginary beings, and we need to.
okay, but the other angle on that is, what I'm trying to say is, I remember a curriculum back in the day that one of our friends was using that had a sense of really good. I loved it in a lot of different ways, but it was based in kind of this more New Age or pagan kind of idea where there were good things in everything, including they would mention the Bible about studying like ancient Mesopotamia and some of that. It was uncomfortable to me. I remember everything about it. There was really great stuff, and then on the other side of that was really uncomfortable because it felt like, just like we're talking about, how you kind of throw Christianity in with everything else. It's just something people believe. It's not. So even the Bible didn't have any extra significance. It wasn't an ancient book that has survived the millennia and, whatever. But so what it made me, I remember sensing that there were good things about it. It had, just like I would say, I could walk into this festival and probably enjoy understanding more about herbs or some of the different, stuff like that, like the interaction with plants and stuff like that. But a lot of the rest of it would be so removed from any connection point to the God that made this that it would be uncomfortable. And it's funny, I wonder if, so almost like a segue into how this world and society right now tries to remove everything from it being connected to God and to his word and to any kind of purity, like you said, to any higher power that we're to answer to.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can remove that, then we can just do whatever we want, right?
I think the pagan religions of Paul's day in the scriptures, like I said, nobody was really interested in becoming one, unifying around. All of them were at odds, and if you worship different pagan deities, there was no desire to harmonize. You were right and they were wrong. That's just not the culture of ancient Rome. Rome, the reason that the Roman emperor had, I'm sorry, I'm running off a track here. Come back to what you're saying. Bring me back in a second. But ancient Rome, the reason that the emperor had divine authority over all things was because everyone had to come under that. It was a way the emperor forced unity. It wasn't like something that was desired that was there. That's why I said that for these pagans all wanting to get together in America and wanting to have unity, that's because there's a larger principle at play here that's in our innate that seems natural
it's called
to us.
freedom.
Seems natural to us, but it's because we're raised in a cultural environment that's been
Right.
highly influenced by Judeo-Christian faith.
Absolutely.
And
And
so-
given us freedom to even do this kind
Right.
of thing and completely separate it out.
And what's
as-
happened, and I think to your point, maybe I missed it, but I heard it, but you made me remind me, was that as time has gone on, people have not shown gratitude. They've forgotten God, and created their own entity using the template of God, but giving it its own name. So they can black out the parts they don't want to keep.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I think we're hearing in our culture too, about sexuality and different pieces that for this month supposedly
Yeah, welcome to this
the
month.
the word pride is supposed to stand for another sin. I think it's hilarious how pride itself, people usually associate that with not a good attitude. If someone's proud, or at least in a angry kind of, lorded over sort of way, it's not seen as positive. And yet now we're proud of another deviation, which obviously goes right against God's will as well. So it's interesting that people can separate it out. And like you said, it seems like they want to unify around something that is not, first of all, is not a unifier. It's
Right.
actually a divider, but also the fact that they are able to be free in this nation to make those kinds of declarations, and that God himself has granted that to us because he is gracious and hasn't completely destroyed us off the earth yet. There's so many pieces to that I just keep reading in I'm reading in Deuteronomy right now, and how God just challenged them over and over again. If you'll just trust me, if you'll just walk in my ways, if you'll
Yeah,
just let
Deuteronomy
me be, the covenant God, the loyal covenant God to you. In other words, there's also a psalm I read the other day that was, I don't know if it's a David psalm or not, but it was saying, what other nation has a God that is so merciful? Like you said, one that's not demanding, or, that you don't have to sacrifice children to, or you don't have to. Why are we so apt to want our own way so much that we will turn away from even a God like that, a God who loves first? Yes, he has a standard that he sets up for us, but that standard is for our good, for our safety.
Yeah,
for
I would
our
say that God
best.
probably wonders that all the time.
Yeah, right. Well, and the saddest part of it is they're missing, like it has been said so many times, you worship something. So I'm thinking that the earth or animals or whatever it is, creation, that they think they're worshiping somehow is not going to, it's not a threat to them somehow, or they think it's not, or whatever. And I just wonder what does that turn into? What do they think they're getting from that? Because if we talk about a God, then we have to admit that we owe him something, but usually we will receive back, like you were talking about.
I think it speaks to the fact that people still yearn for connection to something larger than this life. And they don't
Sure.
want to have that connection absent that connection
same
with the
time, it's not-
responsibility of having to answer to it.
Yeah.
And so by creating something in our own image, we do not have to worry about whether or not it pushes back against us being overweight, or alcohol or drugs and alcohol driven, or sexual desires driven, or greed driven, or envy, or all of these things that are also problematic because of the human condition. None of those things are addressed with a desire to change for the better. Instead, they can just go feel better and just say, well, we want to all get along, and we want to be unified, and we can love one another just the way we are. You're not fat. You're just
Well, I think what's
something
funny
else.
about that is, though, it does seem like somehow those people, and we knew a lot of them in Washington, can pull that off somehow. It's as if
some can.
Satan leaves
you
them
mean pull it
alone.
off in the sense that they seem to be doing
well,
okay?
they seem to have peaceful homes.
I still maintain that they don't. I maintain that. I mean, Isaiah complains, Tanya, that they're the same thing you're saying. Many people out there seem to be fine. The Psalm. There are scriptures where there's complaining openly about why is everybody else
Yeah,
doing
Psalm
okay?
73,
The
yeah,
wicked,
one of
Psalm
my
73.
favorite.
Yeah, these. But then they remind themselves that even if they manage to pull it off, to your point, if they manage to pull it off on earth and they look like their families are good, to what end? are they pulling it? They're not pulling it off. They're literally denying reality until such time as they face a judge. And that should put a heavier burden on Christians going, look, I'm glad you guys have got these disciplines down. I'm glad you've crossed these roads and everything's going well, but to what end? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. That's what they're all saying. But God's is trying to communicate to them when they're saying this. He said, guys, judgment's at your door.
That's right.
And so, God created the world a certain way with certain requirements as to how we're to interact with it. And it's not like he gave us this list of rules to follow. We're stuck with that because of decision we made, or because of decision human beings made, which was Adam and Eve simply had to walk in the garden and don't eat from that tree.
I wonder
And
if
just
it's,
that one thing, which was don't look away from God, don't listen to other advice. Listen to only the advice of your Creator, was something they failed to do, and they acted on that advice and wound up giving us all this wonderful experience we deal with in our culture today.
there was scripture that came to mind while you were saying that. Paul talked about if we go through this life and, God isn't who he says, or it doesn't be true, then we're worse off than, whatever. I'm thinking maybe this is what he was referring to. When we see these people who just literally don't think about eternity at all, they don't consider that there is a God who they will answer to one day, and that Jesus was provided so that they can approach a holy God in the state of sin that we find ourselves in. I wonder if that's what he was meaning. Because when you look at these kind of people, the ones that I'm thinking of aren't really, it's not like they're overly wealthy, or they're not overly, they don't seem to worship just stuff like that. They literally enjoy music, or in fact, the one family in Washington really, really loved music, and their kids were tremendous musicians, and they followed them around, did all these different festivals. Makes me think of kind of probably this type of festival. Also just like Celtic music festivals and stuff like that. And I'm thinking they had great lives. I don't know what after, and if they've ever been challenged on how that translates into afterlife or to eternity. Because Paul is really good about reminding us, but there is eternity to face. There is the rest of the story. The problem is if we're on this earth a little too much and enjoying it a little too much, and we're forgetting that sort of stuff. I don't know. I think it's sad, and it is the way the enemy works, is the subtlety of apathy or of ignoring, because then we have the other blatant, obvious attacks on and against God's word, which would be what this month we were saying. Starting to think in our country that if you're not being arrested and or accused of something, you're probably not on the right side these days.
Right. It used to be the other way around. Now it's
feeling.
not. Let's a couple of things I want to wrap I want to answer two questions when dealing with this, and they're pretty straightforward. What should you do? What shouldn't you do? In other words, one of the reasons that this came up, I didn't even know this festival was in town until last night when we were doing something else in town, and it was brought to my attention that a local church that is a friend of ours, partner with. We partner.
It was awesome.
With,
They're going to have a worship service.
They were
right
going to have
now.
a worship service at 11:30, which is when there was supposed to be something off the books that was
Some sort of
happening at the
ritual or
festival, some sort of
something,
satanic ritual. And that was supposed to be, something going on. I don't know anything about that, but I thought it was, and the church responds correctly. The church, we should be in prayer, but we should be always having, we don't need a reason to worship. We worship every week. It's kind of, they have a festival now and again. I don't think they're
Yeah,
doing
but to call for specific prayers because you know something, I think that's very wise.
Yeah,
think
I
that
don't
was
disagree. That's what I said. This is what. So, what are
awesome
things
of
you
them
should
to
do?
do.
This is what I'm
Yeah.
saying. So, the first thing you should do is pray. Absolutely, you should pray and worship. As I think worship is a good counterpoint to if there's a festival going on with. Because when I read you the description of it earlier, I thought it was funny a little bit. Not that people are doing this, because like I said, I think most of this is people that are acting in ignorance. And so what you should do is, but one of them is like drum circles. They said drum making. Drum circles is such a Northwestern thing. It's like it's such a.
Well, it's California.
It's
Like sit on the
California
beach and
Northwest. It's
beat a
almost
drum,
as
right?
common as Birkenstocks and socks, and very granola, as people say. I've heard. It's very hippie generation. That's granola. If anyone didn't know, I didn't know when I first heard the term, but I like the term granola. Very granola. Anyway, because I like granola. What can I say? But it was very common. We saw drum circles every single week in Olympia. They sat down around the fountain.
Again, Heritage Park. Oh,
No,
yeah.
the fountain downtown. Because you'd be driving home from work, and the drum circle, you'd have the silent people holding their
So that's-
signs, the silent war protesters. They'd always dress in black, and they'd hold a sign every Friday without fail.
Well, I
Good
saw
on them.
that. I didn't hear the
But
drums.
then behind them, on Fountain, there would be drum circles that would happen right after they did that. Almost every
Oh.
week, there'd be back there, just
didn't know that.
drums. It wasn't rap or anything. It was just these crazy hippie kind of
Yeah.
drum things. And so it was very normal. And so here, this is seeing that they're doing that here was kind of, oh, wow, this is just the culture. Again, to say that there's an aspect of it that's very unserious. People are playing with things they don't realize what they're playing with. It's
Well,
a
that's what I was
spiritual
gonna
thing. That's where the
say.
prayer and the
Because
worship
it's not
comes in.
offensive just to play a drum or to do this or that, or even how to describe those activities they're going to do, even to the point of the definition of pagan that I said, which sounds very just benign to the earth or to the understanding of, yeah. But what you were going to say was,
Well, what I was going to say was there's an unserious nature to it, but they don't realize that they're playing with fire. So one of the things we do is we pray for them. Another thing we can do is what we
well,
just...
and the fire they're playing with. Explain that a little bit.
Well,
Again, like
the
you just
demonic
said.
and spiritual
Yeah,
things
if they're
are real.
adding into
and when
it-
you're adding it and you're trying to cultivate and invite spirits
Yeah, in the back
to
end of it.
engage with you. If you're trying to
they're
be
doing some sort
unified
of-
with
you
Satan,
said
it's really a
satanic.
bad idea. Well,
Is that what they
satanic
would call
is?
it?
Well, number one, satanic is a broad. It's our term largely, but yeah, that's what was called. That's what I was
Some sort
told.
of
It was a
spiritual
satanic
ritual?
spiritual ritual that was going on, and I don't know all the details to it. I read an email that had some information on it, but I'm processing through this. I'm going so. Most of the people at these events it's very unserious. They're just at a nature festival that's not Christian. But you get to the people that are there that are very serious. There's atheists who are just like, here's a way I can be in a community. There's agnostics who are, here's a way I can be in a community. And then there's people who are seriously going anti-Christian, anti-Christ. All of it is anti-Christ behavior because it's not considering Christ.
Yeah.
But the behavior versus
But there are
people who are
some truly
seriously
trying to
antagonistic,
deceive or
who are
trying
trying to
to-
cause problems.
Yeah.
And that's where the church was responding. And for those you can pray. And then if you
Well,
if you're when you're
or-
dealing with a spiritual reality like people trying to chant and bring in demonic influence in the area, we should also worship and counter that. There should be such a presence such a power of the presence of God, which we could do a whole nother podcast on cultural, the spirit of a cultural Christian world versus an actual Christian world, because we are now in the deep South, and there is a completely different, to use the term, vibe here than there is where we're up in the Northwest. It's when you see a lack of Christianity there, it's plainly a lack of Christianity. When you come down here, it seems like Christianity's everywhere, but there's a lack of Christianity here. And it's not in the words and in the actions, but it's in the fact that people don't really know what they believe. They say that they call the name of Christ, but without knowing who he is. But that, again, is another topic for another day. Prayer, worship, have an attitude of worship personally, but when you have a church getting together to worship and you can do that, that's great. Do that. Another thing is what is and this is going to lead into what not to do. Another thing is to be a witness. How do you think we could be a witness to folks like that? I don't want to talk the whole time.
No, that's okay. You've got ideas because I end up. I feel like it was really a challenge in Washington, even because it was subtle, a little bit like you were saying, the gaming and atmosphere of a lot of that is fantastical. So many of them do not take it seriously. So therefore, to have a deep conversation with somebody is really not going to be easy. At the same time as so many of them are just accepting. I talked about, well, I was thinking of Hindu and how they accept all the gods, including, but that's not, it's as if they can just say, yeah, I'm spiritual. I'm not a Christian, but I'm spiritual. Here they're a Christian, but they're probably meaning I'm actually just spiritual or something. I don't exactly know what they mean by that. They think they know and understand that they have a spiritual nature. That's what's hard for me to get.
Spiritual, Tanya, you can make the spiritual thing in the South with the same thing we dealt with when we were in the North Middle America. We were dealing with people who came from religious Catholicism. They did the ritual, therefore they were connected. Yeah, and so
That's what I said.
Yeah, you're right.
So a
that's
spiritual-
processing through as I'm saying it again.
If they're
I'm
calling
sorry.
themselves Christian, they likely are just saying the same thing.
Yeah, there's ritual. They
But
go
the
to
saddest
church.
part of
they
it
give to
is
the thing. They do a community
the
service
ones
now
who
and again.
think they have the answers, though, or whichever answers they have answers for you. And it's still, if they don't know, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and he's the only one that comes, that you can only go to God through him. But like we're saying, most of them deny the existence of God at all. So that's not even interesting to them. So I don't know. I feel like this has always been how do you talk to them? How do you start up a conversation of, to me, when we would present the 3 circles there in Washington, we start with the world is broken. And I don't feel like they have the answer to why the world is broken or the brokenness of their own lives. But most of the time they gloss it over to where they don't really want to talk about that or deal with it because they're just fine. I'm fine. You're fine, aren't you? Right?
Right. Well, I think that kind of leans into what we also don't do. Because it's kind of, this is where the Proverbs say, to engage a fool according to his folly, but then it says don't engage a fool according to his folly. So that's the same statement. When you're dealing with a fool in their folly, in other words, just assuming anyone not following Christ is a fool, because they're not, especially if the information is available to them and the invitation is available to them. And that's one of the things that's interesting about living in a culture where it's more available. But as we've learned even here, there's no evangelical, even the evangelicals don't give invitations like they used to. So there's the invitation is more personal. But again,
Tends to be in their family or that kind of thing.
Yeah. The belligerent is the other fool. So you've got a fool that just doesn't know, that's an ignorant person that's acting within the construct of foolishness. And when you say, how do you start a witnessing conversation? Well, you just start one. If that person is belligerent, if they push back and they're argumentative and they're difficult, that's a fool that you don't want to engage. And so there's a don't. Do not engage the fool who is nothing more than interested in folly. When I can still remember the time when I was stupid enough, there was some anti-protesters in front of an abortion clinic, and there was some folks that were senior citizens. They were sitting out there, and these folks were in their face, yelling at them about their pro-abortion points of view, and I was concerned for the well-being of the senior citizens. And one of the guys walked past my car. I was parked. It was at a stop sign, and I said, "Dude, lighten up. You guys don't have to be so mean. You can disagree peaceably." And he got in my car window, and was just at me with it, and said, "I'm not here to dialogue. I'm here to blah." And I realized, I tried to engage, but I realized really quick my temper was rising. And so I pulled away and called the police and asked them to drive by just to make sure that these folks were being okay. I couldn't engage their there was no interest in a conversation. That person was there to be a problem for the people that were just literally sitting in lawn chairs holding signs. That's all that they do. They're not like they're out marching. These other people were jumping up. They were just stupid kids.
I remember that. We were
And
having
so,
a prayer vigil.
yeah, I was foolish to engage that. I should have just called the police and said, come and
Although-
check on him, and not even tried to engage the guy.
I would say, though, if you happen to be actually out there with praying with them or being, I think you probably could have, because you're actually good at that, engage someone to de-escalate the situation. However, being in your car, he probably had the upper hand, thought he could just kind of shout at you or whatever.
I think the second thing that we can not do is ignore it. And I think that's what a lot of people do. And I'm tempted to do that. Ignoring it is an easy thing for me to do. Like I even just said that, I should have gone away. I didn't ignore it, but it made me think about how many times I've driven past those things myself and how much I've not engaged over the years. I mean, we've done the March for Life and things like that, but as far as just participating in the way some people have thrown themselves before danger, and now protesting something as simple as an abortion clinic has become dangerous.
Yeah, sure
And
has.
so,
I think it was difficult too in Washington to know who would actually engage with you, like you're saying, in a conversation to get to the bottom line. Because we also had people there who were very versed on the Bible. They had learned the Bible, so they knew how to fight even from a biblical angle, which we know that Satan did with Jesus in the wilderness. So it's not like they he doesn't know the Bible and couldn't engage that way. But it made me sad when we couldn't get to an actual real discussion with someone, when they would just fight, like you're saying. So I appreciate that. How would we, what would be the best approach, though, to engage them in conversation to try to break those walls down?
Well, yeah, I can think of another conversation that I had one time where I had a lady got in the car. We were having a conversation, and she started railing about some radio host that I enjoyed. And I said, "What's wrong with them?" And said, "Well," and they started going off about it. And I began to ask questions as to why they felt the way they felt about it. So another way to deal with someone who might be a fool in a situation is just to inquire more deeply. That turned out to be a conversation. You know, it wasn't
go anywhere,
it didn't
really.
go a whole lot of distance, but it didn't blow up.
Didn't escalate.
Yeah, which brings me to the third thing that comes to my mind, which is don't mock it or inflame it. Don't do to them what they're doing to you. You know, don't go out there. If so, like this festival down here, they're doing their own thing. They're ignoring. From what I can tell, they're not protesting. We dealt in the Northwest. We dealt with protesters. You know, that's
Well,
what I ran
Olympia,
into.
because it
Olympia
was
was kind of a protest town.
Yeah, because it was a seat of government for Washington. So
Yeah,
it
and
was a lot
so
more.
we saw that all the time, and even had gunshots one time when the whole BLM thing was going on in the summertime. You know, so we were one of those cities. It was a small one, but it's still a city that was doing stupid stuff. And but so in light of folks who are off doing their own thing, mocking it is what would inflame something. It would cause them to come back at you. And I think that, you know, that's what the protesters were trying to do with that those older folks sitting in front of the Planned Parenthood. They were trying to provoke them.
Yeah.
And that is anti-Christian. That is not the way Christians should behave. We do not mock sin. We do not mock evil. We should have nothing to
Don't
do
sit
with
in the
evil.
seat of mockers.
We don't sit in the seat of mockers. Exactly. And so we don't want to do anything to inflame it. Now, if you're talking with someone and someone says something you disagree with them, if you're having a conversation with them, you don't inflame it like the person I was saying in the car.
And like you said,
you
questions
ask questions.
is a good way
Jesus
to do
asked
that.
questions.
Yeah.
And who's the only people Jesus yelled at?
The
His own people.
actual church
yeah,
leaders.
the church leaders. And so there's a place for anger to be displaced, to be put out, but not to those who are in the throes of sin that are lost. We're supposed to be rescuing the perishing. But we have different types of perishing people out there. People who are perishing in their own sin and are angry and loud about it. We don't need to respond in
Makes me
kind
think of the 80s song.
or bring it on. Go ahead.
I think it was one of our favorite artists, and he was talking about standing at the gates of hell and rescuing. Anyway, because that's where the people are. They don't even know they're in that. Do you remember that song?
I'm trying to.
I think it was either Wayne Watson or could have been Steve Camp. Probably sounds more like Steve Camp, who talked about standing and fighting the fight. They're right at the gates of hell. You know, that's what you feel like. But anyway, I was thinking in Isaiah. I was reading Isaiah 35 today, and it was really the opposite. Very encouraging to me, and the things that we see around us. And it was a declaration of the ransomed, and how, to me, it plays out even in our own day, but also how when Jesus came, the wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance. With the recompense of God, he will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. For waters break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and thirsty ground springs of water. A highway shall be there, and it will be called the way of holiness. Jesus said he was the way. The unclean will not pass over it. It shall belong to those who walk on the way. No lion will be there, and they will, the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransom of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy will be on their heads, and they shall obtain gladness and joy. Sorrow and sighing will flee away.
I think that's a good way to wrap it up today. Might as well. I mean, Scripture. I mean, the more we talk, it's just us talking. But
That's right.
thanks so much for listening to Ask Mom and Dad. I am Dad,
And I'm Mom.
and we're so glad you listened. Take care.